Now, thank you. Welcome to my video presentation about oral literature. I wish to thank this time again all our viewers and of course those who are going to take part in my presentation. More so to our high school and scholars, very young scholars at this time when we are dealing and struggling over this pandemic. We know it's a global problem that has brought everything to a standstill, including even economic, social interaction, and of course, worst of all, our education backbone, which has come to a standstill. So I wish to be with you guys and call upon all of us to at least work toward the resolution of this, because we all understand that in the past global pandemics that has existed, we are very sure that we are going to win this one again, and we shall come out victors. Just to mention a few, in the yesteryears, about 100 years ago, we had a French flu, which was a world global problem, and a pandemic which claimed 50 million people, and at long last we come out victors. We defeated that pandemic, and that's where we're living at the moment. Again, in 1945, there was a world war which claimed 65 million people, and at long last we defeated that, and we are victors today. We are very optimistic that this time around again, in the near future, we are going to defeat this COVID-19 as how we just defeated the previous pandemic, because it's all about God's intervention and God protection to all of us, and we know that this will come to an end. Hopefully, in the near future, we look forward for a better world, because all of us are on a siege, economic siege, social siege, and so on. Now, in my presentation today, I wish to welcome all our learners, especially the high school learners, at this time, who are lacking the grip of a classroom teacher, which cannot be substituted with anything. We have seen our parents trying all their best to substitute and bring an alternative of a classroom interaction and a substitute of a classroom teacher, but it has been a challenge because, nothing can substitute and be an alternative of a classroom teacher when it comes to a student-teacher interaction. We tried all our ways. We tried Zoom, we tried WhatsApp, we tried video conferencing, and all are in vain. We're just managing the problem. We never solved that problem of lacking, teachers in class. And therefore, I wish to call upon our students to engage and have this video, so especially the junior classes, who are just in the introductory part of everything. Now, today, I'm going to make a presentation of literature, and more so to the junior classes. So I wish to call upon them, to make a clarity, to make a very vigilant view of this video, because someday I know that it will be all right for them and it will be easy to understand literature. Now, I teach English literature, and like I did not say before, my Thai Daniel, I subscribed from Talek Masai Mara. I'm a teacher of English. I teach English literature. I graduated from the University of Eldoret with a bachelor's in English literature. So I wish to introduce our learners to this class today. Now, I need to define literature and go deeper and deeper and make a clarity and classification of literature, so that this one becomes easy for our learners. Now, what is literature? Literature is a reflection of the society. We simply say literature is a mirror of society. Why do you say mirror? Because our authors, our writers, are making a fictional world. They're creating a world of literature, but they cannot create that world of literature without the real content of the real society. So in other words, we simply say that what writers put on book, what writers present orally, is the reflection of the society, so that what is happening in the society, for example, theft, politics, social life, religious life and all that, is exactly what is created and what is reflected in the literature that we read. So in other words, we say literature is fictional but not factual. In other words, we say it is not literal, it is fictional. What is the meaning? We simply say that writers just create fiction of the real thing that is happening in society. So literature is not based on, it's not based on fact. That's why it is not factual. But it is fictional. Why? Because it is a reflection of what is happening in the society. So that's what I mean by saying literature. So literature is a mirror of society. Literature is a reflection of our society. That's what they call literature. Now, literature is subdivided into two. We have two major categories of literature. We have what is called written literature and oral literature. Now, to start with, written literature is a literature that is put on paper, so that we have different forms. Written literature exists in different forms. We have the prose, which is the fiction, we call it a novel. We have a short story, which is a collection of short stories. Writers put together short stories and call them an anthology of short stories. We have the play, which is of course the drama in our case here, but a drama which is put on paper, and therefore it is called the play in this case. Number 4 is what we call a novella. A novella is a piece of writing. It is a text which is between a novel and a short story. So it is neither a short story nor a novel. In our case, we call it novella. So I need learners to understand the difference between a novel and a novella. Because a novel is a prose form, it is more advanced. It is voluminous, more than a novella. But a novella is presented the characteristics of a short story. It is a combination of characteristics of a short story and that of a novel. Therefore, we call it novella. The word novella is a foreign name, but in our next class, we shall explain more, the difference between a novel and a novella. So oral literature exists, written literature exists in such forms. We also have written literature, where there are several poems that are put on paper. There is a collection of poems, for example, poems by somebody called Sabarwal. He's an Indian writer. We have poems, an anthology or a collection of East African poems, where East African poem writers combine together, their poems and form a collection of East African poems. So such poems which are put on paper falls under written literature because they are put on paper. Now, we also have the second type is oral literature. Now, oral literature is defined as a performed art which is transmitted from one generation to another through a word of mouth. Now, I need learners to underline 3 words in that definition. The first one is performance. Number 2 is art. Number 3 is word of mouth. Why do we underline? We underline the word performance because oral literature is a performance. It is put on stage. For example, in our modern time, there is oral literature is orally transmitted, performed on stage, and therefore we must have an audience, and in this case, a presenter, so that having a presenter and an audience is putting us to that scenario of saying, we must have a stage, we must have an audience, and a presenter or a performer. In our case, therefore, that is why we call it oral literature must be performed. So oral literature must be performed. So it must involve a performance. Otherwise, it's not oral literature. Number 2 is the word art. We call it art because it's not a science. In this world, if something is not an art, then it's a science. So oral literature is an art. It is not a science. So why do we say this? We say it's an art because it is artistic. It is theoretical. But a science is empirical, based on practice and so on. But oral literature is not a science. It is more artistic than scientific. So that's what we mean by saying art. So there must be the word art in that definition. to clarify the fact that oral literature is not a science, but it's an art. The last phrase is word of mouth. We call it word of mouth. Why? Because oral literature is orally transmitted. It is not written. It is orally transmitted. That's what we call it, word of mouth. And therefore that brings very concrete and combination of a well-versed definition of oral literature, which now says that oral literature is a performed art that is transmitted from one generation to another through a word of mouth. Just to mention but a few, in our old traditional society, like the Western people of Kenya, we have the Maasai people of Masai Mara and Maasai land in general. Used to have what is called informal education. Most Africans in this case have informal education, and one of the ways of passing it on from one generation to another is to oral literature. In this case, for example, Maasai society, I subscribe from the society. Sorry, at evening hours, our grandfathers and mothers used to have storytelling sessions, which normally existed or takes place in the evening, where we have a grandfather or a grandma, being a performer in this case, or a storyteller. Then the audience here are the children. So by so doing, that is oral literature, because it exists, or it involves a word of mouth, because it's orally transmitted from the performer, the grandma, to the children. Number two, it is an art. Why? Because it is something theoretical, something artistic. There's no practical that happens in that performance. Number two, it is just a word of mouth, the extent of word of mouth and an ear to listen. Then number three is that it is a performance, because it is existing, some sort of performance. Look at the performer. The performer is a grandma and a grandfather, and the audience here are the children. So in that case, that's a very good example of oral literature. So that is what we call oral literature. Now, oral literature is subdivided into three forms. So we have three types of oral literature. We call them genre. So we have three genres of oral literature. One is the oral narrative. Two, short forms. Three, songs. Now, to begin with, oral narratives, there are 6 types of oral narratives. One, we have the myth, we have the legend, we have what is called archaeological narratives, or we call it the why stories. We call them why stories because they explain the reason why something exists the way it is. For example, there is a stereotype, or sort of a story about a hyena. Why do hyenas limp? But those are archaeological stories because they explain the reason why something exists the way it is. We have what is called the dilemma stories. The dilemma stories normally presents a puzzle to solve, where people have to make decisions of everything. For example, there's a story of a dilemma story, which involve a leopard. We have a leopard, we have the grass, and a goat, and somebody need to make them cross. That if it involves a person to make very, very much strict decisions. In this case, which requires wit. It requires a lot of thought out, so that at the end of the day, it is very challenging. That's why we call it dilemma stories. Has what is called a puzzle to solve. Then we have what is called the monster narrative, which is also called the ogre stories. In the monster narrative, these are narratives that presents evil versus good. In other words, the evil in this case will finally come to an end, because normally good thrives, and in this case it thrives over evil. Good defeats evil. In the simplest term to understand, in ogre stories, we have the hero and heroine. We have hero or heroine. Then we have what is called the villain. Then the villain is normally associated with the negative characteristics. Then the hero is normally associated with positive characteristics. And in most ogre stories, the hero finally defeats the villain, and the villain is disassociated with anything good. So that's what we called the ogre stories. So we have 6 types of oral narratives. Now, the other type of oral literature is the short forms. The short forms, which include the following. We have the riddles, we have what is called the trickster narrative. I mean, not the trickster, but what do we call it? We call it the tongue twisters. We have proverbs and wise sayings. We have what is called puns, or we call it wordplay. So and we also have oral poems. Remember, in written poetry, we had what is called written poems. But here, in oral narratives, in oral literature, we have what we call oral poems. So oral poems falls under oral literature, but written poems normally falls under written literature in this case. So those are the types of the short forms of oral literature. Then lastly, we have what is called songs. In songs, there's several types of songs, but in most cases, we try to categorize it. For example, we have political songs, we have praising songs, we have worship songs, we have work song, we have circumcision songs, we have the Duchess, which is called the funeral songs, we have what we call lullaby songs, we have children's songs. Just but a few. Let me just clarify something over the difference between lullaby songs and children's songs. The difference between lullaby and children's songs is that lullaby songs are normally presented, or they're normally sung by the caregivers. In this case, I may not need to violate and call them house girls, or maids, but I call them caregivers. So it is normally presented by caregivers. Caregivers normally sing to children to stop them crying, in this case, or sometimes to tease them, so that they entice them at the end of the day, maybe to eat food and all that. That is a lullaby song. But children's songs are normally performed by children themselves. So there's a difference between lullaby songs and children's songs. And in this case, I think our learners have got a difference between lullaby songs and children's songs. So that is what we call oral literature. So those are the 3 sub-genres of oral literature. 3 sub-genres of oral literature, which include oral narratives, where we have 6 types of oral narratives. We have songs, where we have several types of songs. Then we have short forms of oral literature, which include riddles, proverbs and wise sayings. We have puns or wordplay. And lastly, we have the tongue twisters. So for today, that is my presentation, and I wish to call upon our learners to at least make use of this. So in our next class, of course, we are going to present more, so that we shall deep in to understand better, to understand oral literature, because we shall pick from oral literature first of all. We shall have the characteristics of oral narratives. We shall have those of songs and those of short forms, and of course we shall have examples of short forms and so on. So that's what I mean by saying that. But before I close it up, I have a riddle, and I wish anybody viewing this video to at least follow it up and try to answer that. Now, riddle. I wish you guys say riddle come. Now, the riddle goes this way. I am greater than God. The poor has me. The rich need me. Then who am I? Thank you very much. Solve that riddle and meet you next time. Stay safe. Put on your masks. Wash your hands. Sanitize your hands. Live this period. Beat, fight, defeat COVID-19. Collection from Maite Daniel. Talek Masai Mara. Thank you.